Hello, everyone. There are moments when everything seems to be going fine, and for a while, you believe that maybe things are finally starting to change. You've been moving forward, even if slowly, even if imperfectly, and that alone feels different from where you used to be. You remember how difficult it was to even begin. You remember how heavy that first step felt and how uncertain everything seemed at the start. But somehow you moved. You continued. You stayed with it longer than you expected. And for a moment, it feels like something has shifted. Not everything, but enough to notice. Enough to make you think that maybe this time will be different. That maybe you've finally found a rhythm that you can hold on to. But then, quietly, almost without warning, something changes again. It doesn't come all at once. It doesn't arrive in a way that clearly tells you what is happening. It begins as something small, a slight hesitation, a moment of doubt, a thought that feels familiar even before you fully recognize it. You notice yourself slowing down, not because you decided to stop, but because something inside you no longer feels as steady as it did before. The steps you were taking begin to feel less certain. The direction that once felt clear starts to blur. And without realizing it, you find yourself asking a question you thought you had already moved past. Why does this feel difficult again? At first, you try to ignore it. You tell yourself that it's temporary, that it's just a phase, that if you keep going, the feeling will pass. And maybe that's true. But the feeling does not disappear immediately. It stays, quietly, persistently. And the more you notice it, the harder it becomes to pretend it isn't there. You begin to feel something else. Not just doubt, but a kind of quiet disappointment. Not in what you've done, but in the feeling that you are somehow returning to a place you thought you had already left. It feels familiar, too familiar, as if you've been here before, as if this moment is not new, but something that has repeated itself in different forms. You start to remember other times, times when you began something, times when you made progress, times when you felt like you were finally moving forward. And then, slowly, almost without noticing, everything faded again. The same pattern, the same cycle, the same quiet return to uncertainty. And that realization feels heavier than you expect, because it's not just about this moment. It's about the possibility that this will happen again. That no matter how many times you start, how many times you try to continue, you might always find yourself back here, in this same place, with this same feeling. And that thought brings something deeper, a question that feels more difficult to ignore. Is this just who I am? You don't say it out loud. You don't fully accept it, but the thought is there. And once it appears, it changes the way everything feels. Because now it's no longer just about continuing. It's about whether continuing even makes a difference. And that is where things begin to feel uncertain again. Not because you don't want to move forward, but because something inside you is no longer sure that it matters. That question does not go away easily. It stays somewhere in the background of your thoughts. Even when you try to focus on something else, you continue for a while, but now each step feels slightly different. Not because the action itself has changed, but because the meaning behind it has. Before, you were simply moving. Now you are watching yourself move. You are noticing every hesitation, every small pause, every moment where your energy feels lower than before. And the more you notice these things, the more they seem to grow. You begin to wonder if this is a sign, a signal that something is not working, a quiet indication that maybe you are not meant to continue in this direction. Because if something feels this difficult again, doesn't that mean something is wrong? That thought feels logical. It feels reasonable. Because we often expect progress to feel clearer over time. We expect things to become easier as we continue. We expect that once we move past a certain point, we won't have to face the same struggles again. But what if that expectation is not entirely true? What if the return of difficulty is not a sign that you are going backward? What if it is simply a part of moving forward? You begin to look at the pattern differently, not as something that failed, but as something that repeated. And repetition, when you think about it carefully, is not always negative. It is not always a reset. Sometimes it is a cycle, a natural movement that happens when something is still developing. Think about it. Every time you learn something new, it doesn't become stable immediately. It appears. It disappears. It returns. And each time it returns, it feels slightly different. Not completely new, but not exactly the same either. And maybe what you are experiencing now is something similar. Not a failure to continue, but a deeper layer of the same process. A layer that you did not see before. Because at the beginning, everything is simple. You are just starting. You are just moving. You are not aware of all the complexities yet. But as you continue, you begin to see more. You begin to notice things that were not visible before. The doubts that were always there, but quieter. The resistance that did not appear until you went further. The questions that only exist when you reach a certain point. And when those things appear, it can feel like you are going backward. But maybe you are not. Maybe you are just seeing more of the path than you did before. And seeing more can feel heavier, because now you are not just moving through something. You are aware of what you are moving through. That awareness can feel uncomfortable. It can slow you down. It can make everything feel less certain. But it also means something important. It means you are still in it. It means you have not left the process. It means you have reached a point where things are no longer simple, but more real. And real things are rarely smooth. They do not move in a straight line. They move in patterns, forward and back, clear and unclear, certain and uncertain. And when you begin to see it this way, something shifts. The repetition no longer feels like a mistake. It begins to feel like movement, not the kind of movement that is easy to see, but the kind that happens beneath the surface. The kind that is not always visible, but still real. You begin to understand that returning to a familiar feeling does not mean you are in the same place, because you are not the same person who was here before. You have moved. You have seen more. You have experienced something that did not exist the last time you felt this way. And that changes the meaning of this moment. It is no longer just a repeat. It is a continuation, even if it feels similar. And maybe that is the part that is easy to miss. We look at the feeling and assume the situation is the same. But the situation has changed. We have changed. And that difference, even if it is small, means that this moment is not the same as before. It only feels the same. And feelings, as real as they are, do not always tell the full story. When you begin to see this, something becomes a little lighter. Not because the difficulty disappears, but because it no longer feels final. It no longer feels like proof that you cannot continue. It begins to feel like something you can move through, something that belongs to the process rather than something that stops it. And maybe that is enough for now. Not to solve everything, not to feel completely certain, but to see this moment differently than before. That shift in perspective does not remove the difficulty, but it changes how you hold it. The doubt is still there, and the hesitation still appears, but it no longer feels like something that ends everything. It begins to feel like something that exists within it. You are no longer standing outside the process, questioning whether you belong in it. You are inside it even in this moment, and that makes a difference, even if it is quiet. You take a moment to notice where you are, not where you expected to be, not where you hoped to be, but where you actually are right now. And instead of comparing it to something else, you simply stay with it. That alone feels unfamiliar, because for a long time you may have measured every step. You may have looked at your progress and asked whether it was enough, whether it was fast enough, clear enough, meaningful enough. But in this moment, you are not asking those questions. You are just there. And in that stillness, something subtle begins to happen. The need to decide everything right now begins to soften. The pressure to know whether this will work or not begins to loosen. You are not solving the entire path. You are simply allowing this moment to exist without forcing it into a conclusion. And when you do that, something becomes possible again. Not in a dramatic way, not with a sudden burst of energy, but quietly. A small opening, a small sense that maybe you can continue, not because everything feels right, but because it does not have to. You look at what is in front of you, the same step that felt uncertain just a moment ago, the same direction that felt unclear, but now it does not feel as heavy. Not because it has changed, but because the meaning you placed on it has softened. It is no longer a test. It is no longer something that has to prove anything. It is simply a step again. And because of that, it becomes possible to take it. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly, you move even if it is small. And in that movement, something important happens. You are no longer trying to escape the feeling of doubt. You are moving with it. You are allowing it to exist without letting it decide everything. And that is different. That is something you may not have noticed before. Because before, doubt felt like something that stopped you, something that told you to wait, something that made everything feel uncertain. But now it is just there, present but not controlling. And that changes the experience of continuing, because continuing no longer depends on feeling certain. It no longer depends on feeling ready. It no longer depends on everything making sense. It becomes something simpler, something quieter, something that exists even when things are not clear. You begin to understand that stopping and continuing are not always separate. Sometimes they exist very close to each other. Sometimes the moment you think you have stopped is simply a moment of pause within something that is still moving. And if that is true, then maybe you have not been starting over as many times as you thought. Maybe you have been continuing, just in a way that was not easy to recognize. That idea does not solve everything. It does not remove every doubt or hesitation, but it gives you something else. A different way of seeing your own movement. A way that does not break everything into success or failure, forward or backward, but something in between. Something that allows for pauses, for uncertainty, for moments that do not look like progress but are still part of it. So if you find yourself here again, in that familiar space where doubt returns and things feel uncertain, maybe you do not need to push it away. Maybe you do not need to fight it or try to prove that you are stronger than it. Maybe you just need to see it differently. Not as an ending, but as a part of what you are already in. And if you can do that, even briefly, even quietly, then something continues. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are still here, still aware, still willing to move, even if slowly. And sometimes that is more than enough. See you in the next story.